E tui te karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga. Ia mā kina kina ki uta, ia mā taratara ki tai. I ake ana kākura, he tio, he huka, he tauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome back to our Reconvened Strategy and Policy Committee meeting of 26th of November. Please let myself or Democracy Advisor know if you intend to leave the meeting. There'll be a break at about 11:45 and we will hear the last submitter at about 1 o'clock. We'll have a half-hour lunch break and be back for a demonstration on the new website and news channel after that. So we will get underway, and we don't need to do apologies because we've done that at other meetings, so we'll just get straight into it. So I'd like to welcome Anna Campbell-Welch. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for coming in. So, Anna, you've got 5 minutes. It does go incredibly fast, so if you do have some time for questions in there, that'd be great, but if you don't, that's also okay.
Thanks for this opportunity to talk with you. I'll read this to keep to time. A brief background. I'm a registered architect, partner in Red Design Architects, where we specialised in designing environmentally sensitive and accessible homes. And I'm part of Newtown Festival team and a long-time member of the Newtown Residents Association. I'm also the manager of a charitable organisation providing healthcare for people with a rare debilitating disorder. I've lived and worked in Newtown for nearly 40 years with my partner Martin Hanley. Between us, we've been given 3 absolutely positively Wellingtonian awards by City Council for community engagement and urban design initiatives, including the Newtown Festival. We are passionate about creating the best outcomes for Newtown and for Wellington. I'm going to talk about 4 main points. We totally agree with the need for more affordable, healthy and accessible housing in Wellington, but the draft spatial plan is not the right solution. I will talk about Newtown. A market forces approach allowing high-rise building of more than 6 storeys in 3/4 of the residential area amongst 1- and 2-storey homes is not good planning and will not lead to good placemaking. It's a recipe for gentrification, not for quality, affordable housing. And mixing building heights and types to this extreme in residential areas is not good anywhere in Wellington. Second point, density done well. Newtown and Berhampore are communities where all the people matter, home to a very diverse, inclusive, creative, connected community, a mixture of renters and homeowners, and a festival that celebrates this. We want to welcome more people to live in Newtown, but not displace those already there. Not all old houses need saving, but increased housing density needs to be done really well at a scale and height that fits into the urban and social fabric of our existing streets, without negative impacts. Which leads me to point 3. The development needs to be concentrated, not scattered throughout the suburb. That's where we have 2 plans. The first has an outline in red of the suburban centre zone in Newtown. And the second shows where new housing should be built. In Newtown, the suburban centre is the place for increased density. It's perfect. It's already zoned for 4 storeys and buildings right up next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, without the side yards and setbacks required in residential areas. The road is wider than the residential streets. Martin and I have developed a detailed plan as a proof of concept and embodiment of the recommendation by Newtown Residents Association to densify along the transport spine. This is after the Residents Association have done their own community engagement exercise for the Planning for Growth consultation in 2019. Our plan shows where and how more than 2,000 more homes can be provided in Newtown by zoning this area for up to 6 storeys. This is 3 to 4 times the Planning for Growth number of 450 to 700 new homes required in Newtown over the next 30 years. We've talked to commercial property owners who are ready and keen to start building, not waiting for random developers to buy in. Many of these buildings need earthquake strengthening already, so they're ripe for upgrading. They just need the council to make it possible. We've looked into the potential with our map of every site in the suburban centre zone, because we know it so intimately, and included a few more on the periphery where there are underutilised properties where increased density would not have a negative impact. We've used 3 different building types where each apartment has light and sun, allowed for a mix of comfortable sized apartments, not shoeboxes. The iconic historic buildings have been preserved untouched and historic frontages left intact, but allowing for apartments behind. Infrastructure is easier to upgrade in a concentrated strip along the commercial centre. The new homes are right on the bus route, sheltered by verandas, right amongst Newtown's shops, cafes, supermarkets, community services, library, within close walking distance of schools, medical centres, hospitals, hospice, churches, parks, sports fields. This sort of planned growth would be a win-win that plays an important role in reducing car dependency, fosters social connectivity, all without taking away existing housing to make more. The last point, community co-design, working collaboratively for the best outcomes. We welcome the opportunity to work with others in the community to expand on this in the future, to identify other places where increased density would sit well in the landscape and neighbourhoods to design the very best outcomes for the future. It's important for the council to work together with existing communities, build goodwill instead of conflict, use that local knowledge to find the best solutions. Make Wellington a really great place for the people of today as well as tomorrow and future generations. Thank you.
Kia ora. Well, that was very well timed. Thank you, Anna. And thank you very much for sharing your experience and a lot of work that you've put into this in the background. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome Rosalind McIntosh. Kia ora, Rosalind. Page 248. So, Rosalind, you've got 5 minutes, which does, as you can see, go quite quickly. Thank you.
Marina, and thank you for letting me make this submission. I live just up the hill there on Wesley Road, and I have three specific requests of Wellington City Council on the draft spatial plan and 3 comments. And the requests relate to those pre-1930 houses in Wellington that have been well renovated and maintained. First, I request that the Council ensure that the spatial plan is initiated in stages so that first the derelict houses and commercial areas are renewed and refreshed and made viable. After that, if more housing is needed, we may have to go for the destroying the better parts of the city. If the whole city is opened up to densification at once, the depressed areas will remain derelict, while the best areas will be immediately destroyed, along with the unique character that makes Wellington City a delight to live in and to return from overseas. Wellington otherwise would become like many indistinguishable, ugly, sad, and characterless cities that I have worked in or visited in the United States. My second request is that the council protects from demolition all houses built before 1930 that have been well maintained and well renovated, not just those in selected small parts. These houses, like mine, contain the remains, the memory of the ancient forest ecosystems and the majestic trees that have been destroyed over most of our landscape a century or so ago. These houses also show us craftsmanship, care and patience of an earlier era that cannot be recreated again. Many of us have lovingly restored and maintained our old houses over the years at considerable personal time and expense. Please allow us to continue to protect what is valuable in our cultural heritage, these visual and tactile memories of our journey to the present time. And my third request is most specific. I, with at least 6 of my neighbours, I have their request in writing, request that the council, as proposed, confirm the small Eastern Wesley Road neighbourhood as a character area to join up with the Western Wesley Road character area at the top of Bolton Street. All our houses are 100 to more than 140 years old. Thank you. As well, I would like to make very clear that I completely support the building of more houses in the region to take care of the many people and families living in too stressful circumstances because of inadequate housing. For 5 years, I have volunteered in the poorest area of Wellington and grieve the insurmountable problems we place on the children growing up there. This must be remedied without losing what is beautiful and culturally valuable in our city. Our prosperity in the future depends on us doing both these things at once. We have the imagination to do so, I am sure. Further, we know how to design vital, sustainable and beautiful living spaces and communities. We just heard some of that. I request strong oversight by the community and government to make flourishing communities. It cannot be left to commercial interests. There's much more at stake than financial profits here. Finally, I would like to draw Council's attention to the method that the City of Seattle used to achieve densification after decades of acrimony and blocked progress in trying to do so. They implemented citizens' assemblies in each area in which the local residents together, using expert advice, designed their development while including densification. The outcome pleased everybody. It can be done. Can we plan Wellington's future using our citizens' imagination, creativity and expertise locally like this? Please. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, that was perfect timing, Rosalind. Ngā mihi ki a koe. Thank you for coming in to share with us today. Kia ora. No mai Marion Evans. Oh, she is. Welcome. Thank you for coming in. So you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Very glad to be here. And I have a PowerPoint. There it is. So I just go like this. I'm Marion Evans, and I live on the Upper Oriental Terrace Zigzag, where I'm one of the gardeners who care for the road reserve, focusing on native plants, fruit trees, and bee-loved flowers. The Zigzag in the St Gerard's precinct is the bridge between Mount Victoria and Oriental Bay, and it's part of the Mount Victoria Character Zone. And it's pretty obvious where it is on this image. You can see the little zigzag there. And I have some egg on my face because I misread the spatial plan maps and thought that the big red area at the top of Hawker Street proposed a change to 3 to 4 storey apartment buildings for 69 to 71 Hawker Street, as well as for St Gerard's. But council staff told me the other day it actually refers only to St Gerard's, and this is probably their mistake and will be rectified. So I won't address that issue now, which I did in my submission. I'm very concerned about the housing crisis, and since I sent my submission, I've thought a lot about who on Mount Vic is most likely to benefit from the proposed changes and who could benefit more. These are those who I believe will benefit. People who want to build large single-family homes, people who want to provide or rent Airbnbs, which are pervasive on Mount Vic now, people who want to build or can afford to high-end apartments. And these are who I believe could benefit more from the groups I've been familiar with on the decades I've lived there. Artists who are much less likely to live there now, single women like the women at the Wellington Women's Boarding House who would like to stay in the area. I can't read that writing at a distance, I'll just find from here. Low-income people and families, and as visitors, people who enjoy the coherent streetscapes on the main corridors from Courtney Place to the Green Belt and Oriental Bay for recreational purposes on foot, on bikes and on buses. So I looked again at the draft, especially the maps, and thought about how this side of Mount Vic has changed and walked the area in my head and on foot, visualising the suburb as again a welcoming home for a much more diverse population, while still a special place to visit for those who don't live here. And this is my first suggestion, which is that for type 3 intensification along that area marked with a red line where housing meets the green belt. I think it has multi-dimensional benefits, and I've listed the benefits there. More housing for low-income groups, listed here. and you can read more. The direct green areas section for many more residents. It won't block views or the sun from other dwellings, encourages retention of large area of other character dwellings. What's the next one? It's not on the high-use corridors, and it helps protect high heritage and other green areas on Mount Vic. And there are other possibilities that I've got here, which I think would help with housing. Which you can see up there and which you can have a copy of. I've been inquiring around the country about how other places help with it, for example, with that new thing with 3x3 houses, tiny homes that can go in people's backyards, with the home shares, and with connections with faith-based organisations who will maybe develop their land a little bit more effectively than they have in the past. And then there's some references there if anybody is interested. And there's a few seconds if anybody has a question.
Councillor Rush.
Could you just, thanks very much for that. Could you just talk us through the home share thing that's happening in Napier?
Yes, it's an international organisation, and it's geared to people sharing their houses, and it's worked in New Zealand in the Bay of Plenty, for instance, which is the one I know most about. It takes 2 or 3 months to pair up someone who has space in their house with somebody who needs accommodation, and that person gets accommodation in return for about 10 hours work a week. And there are things like police checks, and there are resources supporting that. And so the ones I know in the Bay of Plenty, I think there's a 90-year-old and 94-year-old who would otherwise be in an old people's home, who are able to stay in their own homes. And one of them has got an artist staying with her who is very glad to have the space and to have the space to do her work, and the other one has a student. And it tends to be, it doesn't have to be permanent, but it tends to be quite a long-term relationship.
Tēnā koe, thank you for coming in to kōrero with us. We appreciate you taking your time. I'd like to welcome Generation Zero. I think we've got Marco here and Eleanor. Kia ora kōrua. Thank you. So you've got 10 minutes, and I'm sure there will be some questions if you want to leave some time for questions. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Marco and this is Eleanor, and Generation Zero strongly supports the spatial plan, and we actually want the council to go further in enabling more intensification and more housing. I urge you to read our submission for all our thoughts, but what I want to impress upon you today is that enabling more housing through intensification is crucial to the future success of our city. You must pass a strong spatial plan. So take a long-term view. This plan looks out 30 years in the future. That's 2050. We have to be at net zero emissions by that point. The current development pattern of banning development in the city and pushing people further and further up north into the Hutt Valley and Kapiti Coast is not sustainable, and we just won't meet those targets. Every terraced house and apartment that you block in the city is a sprawling, high-emission suburb somewhere else. But fighting climate change isn't the only reason for housing intensification. The status quo is that house prices and rents in Wellington are increasing 15% year on year. That means that house prices double roughly every 5 years. And who does that impact? It means gentrification. As high rents push out lowest paid workers and marginalised groups from their suburbs as other people move in. And we have the perverse reality of house prices enriching those who already own property while slowly killing others with cold, drafty and mouldy homes that are the worst in the country and among some of the worst in the OECD. But people have no choice but to take those houses due to our massive housing shortage. And this plan isn't just about planning for growth. It's about meeting the existing housing shortage that's built up over the past few decades and continues to grow every single day. The scale of the problem is massive, and tinkering around the edges, just a little bit on Adelaide Road, a little bit here, is a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. And if you believe some people who have come here and told you that growth is not going to happen or it's a bad thing. I'm here to tell you that people will be coming to Wellington. We have jobs. We have a vibrant city. We have a beautiful harbour on a good day. And if you don't allow more housing, we'll see more overcrowding and rocketing prices. Trying to stop people come here is like denying gravity. Accept that it's happening and plan appropriately. But even further than that, more people in the city is a good thing. It means more economic development, shops, community groups, festivals, events. And when you try to say no to growth, what you're actually saying is no to all the skilled workers, amazing musicians and artists, creative and driven students, and many other talented and diverse people who want to make Wellington their home. And it doesn't have to be like this. Enabling more dwellings in Wellington through densification, where people want to live, is the major thing this council can do to curb high prices and rents. Don't just take my word for it. There are many sane housing markets around the world. Take a look at Tokyo, all of Germany and Switzerland, Houston, Atlanta, Brisbane, just to name a few. All have seen very little real house price growth compared to New Zealand. There's no law of nature that said house prices have to exponentially grow. We can actually tackle this. And what about an example closer to home? Take Auckland's unitary plan. It has a lot of parallel lessons relevant to Wellington. We were heavily involved in 2015 in pushing for more upzoning in Auckland to help young people afford good quality homes, townhouses, and apartments, and to create a low carbon city. Residents' associations banded together in Auckland and stripped more than 50% of the development capacity from the unitary plan, meaning leafy suburbs right next to the city like Remuera, Ponsonby, Mount Eden, and Mission Bay all retained low height limits, while all upzoning occurred right in the city or further out. These same people said they weren't opposed to densification, and their area just wasn't suitable. And that housing and more housing doesn't help affordability anyway. There's some similarities in our discourse as well, right? So what actually happened? Auckland drastically simplified its zoning rules and its consenting laws, leading to greater development potential. Consents were far easier to get, and the places that were upzoned have seen new high-quality townhouses and apartments. And it actually led to house prices stabilizing for about 4 years as new development flooded the market. Auckland now builds nearly 1,000 more homes than its population needs every year, which is good, but they still have tens of thousands of accumulated shortage to get through. For a short while there was no capital gains in housing. Just sitting on a house didn't make you money. The only way to make money off housing was to actually house people. Many new developers also emerged. If we have a situation in Wellington where we have complex and long consenting processes that require fighting tooth and nail for anything, it means that only the big developers with deep pockets can survive. All the rest run for the hills. Auckland saw small-scale developers like Ockham Residential building beautiful terraced and apartment housing. They partnered with local mana whenua, have a proportion of units as subsidised Kiwi Build, shared veggie gardens, pools, green space, and rideshare, all while being less than a standalone house and of much greater quality. This shows that upzoning is not enough. You actually have to make some improvements in the district plan too. But Wellington can go further than Auckland. I urge you to not strip any housing potential out of this plan, especially in the inner suburbs where there's ample green space and other infrastructure. Allow housing choice. People want to live in apartments, terrace housing, as well as houses. Let them choose that. And be sensible on heritage and character protection. The current system of having all 7 inner suburbs ban any new development on heritage grounds is madness. The current plan is already a massive compromise. We think that housing should be allowed, and more than the spatial plan already plans for. A narrow view of heritage that only includes colonial history, while people live in garages, inhale black mold, and the planet warms, is not the way forward. The city also has a shamefully small proportion of accessible housing for the many people in our community with disabilities. The spatial plan is the best chance for re-engineering our city towards a kinder, more accessible society, but the plan must commit to accessible design and principle and action that in the district plan. We also need a plan for and showcase mana whenua history at the same level we showcase colonial history. The spatial plan is not going to be a silver bullet for our housing woes, but it's one of the best options we have. A housing crisis isn't an inevitability. It's solvable. And one of the major parts of the solution is sitting right in front of you right now. Please pass the plan.
Kia ora, we do have some pātai. Did you have anything you want to say, Eleanor?
No, but I'm happy to help answer questions.
Fantastic. Our first pātai is from Councillor Rush.
Thanks, guys. Another good submission. I really do enjoy your submissions, so I appreciate it. You mentioned at one point that what we might do if we constrain things will be only a drop in the bucket of what we need. Totally agree. Do you accept that the Wellington City Council can really only facilitate private investment, and that, as a consequence, is going to lead to more higher-end properties and not deal with some of the sort of market failures we're seeing that you mentioned before?
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think that the private market delivers homes at many different price points. If you have really difficult consenting rules and land prices are really high, then why would you target the bottom end of the market? You might as well just go luxury. So if you take away some of those barriers, you can actually allow for different housing points at different segments. And also, look at Kāinga Ora. They've decided that councils are so bad with their rules that they're going to consent stuff themselves. So if you actually make consenting rules good for everyone, you'll get community housing suppliers, as we're seeing in Auckland, co-housing, private development, yes, and public development. You get the whole breadth of the housing spectrum.
I've talked to the chief executive of Arkham Residential, and they will not build in Wellington because of how ridiculously hard it is to get consents for the type of developments they want to build down here. And I think it's also a supply issue. If we're not producing enough houses, I guess the idea is even if they are high-end apartments we're building in the city, fine, but people will move out of other homes to move into those homes, and then those homes will become available. And over time, house prices will reduce because landlords won't be able to charge ridiculous prices for rents, and house prices won't be so high because there will be more available and more competition.
Thanks for that.
Kia ora,
Trickle-down economics.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. And yes, we definitely need more houses. Just when, I know you referred to Auckland and Brisbane, but when we look at those cities, both of them are actually quite sprawled out. You know, so we talk about the densification that's occurred in pockets in there. And I know you've also talked about, climate change and reducing our emissions. Do you think sometimes we're comparing apples with pears when we compare Wellington City, not the region, Wellington City with Auckland?
Probably not. If you look at Auckland, 80% of development is actually within the existing metropolitan urban boundary. And the reason why there isn't more is because if you look at the Auckland Unitary Plan, there's a big swathe of all the suburbs that I just mentioned before that said no more housing. And if they actually let people live there, you would see even more densification. Yes, there's going to be sprawl, but that is the status quo right now. There's a new development in Horowhenua that's saying when Transmission Gully opens, you got a 1 hour shot into the city. So I think we've got to change that logic, eh?
And it's a mistake to take a Wellington-centric approach to this plan. Like, yes, it is a plan for Wellington City, but what we do here has a massive effect on other cities in the region. People are moving to the Porirua and the Hutt and putting the house prices up there and gentrifying those cities, and then people there are moving even further afield because of what happens in Wellington City. And I think it's quite outrageous that people are driving in from Upper Hutt into our city each day, spending 2 hours commuting there and back to clean our floors and then drive back again because they can't afford to live in the capital city of Aotearoa. I think that's undemocratic, for one thing, and it's just ridiculous in this day and age.
Thank you.
Ngā mihi mai o Hākia Korua, thank you for coming in today to kōrero with us. All right, I'd like to welcome Rona from the New Towns and Residents Association. Kia ora, Rona. So you've got 10 minutes, and there will likely be some questions.
Okay. I hope you've got our written submission in front of you. I'm going to speak briefly to a few key points, but there isn't time to cover all of it. It's interesting that we follow directly on from Generation Zero because naturally we have a different take on the situation. I've asked Anna to come back to the table because the proposal she talked about earlier is a key part of our hopes for Newtown, and you might have questions if we allow time for that. Right, now which one? That one? The slide shows the reason we are protesting against the draft spatial plan. You'll be very familiar with these maps by now, but if you don't live or work in Newtown, you might not have registered just how much of our suburb has been coloured purple, which of course is type 4B housing in which 6+ stories must be allowed. Most of the Newtown residential area is 1 or 2 story homes and would be very vulnerable to shading, wind and the other effects of mixing high-rise buildings with low. This is central to our concerns about the current plan. You will have heard about this from other submitters, and I guess the repetition is a sign of how much this affects people. The ability for developers to pepper pot 6-story developments amongst existing 1 and 2 story housing would have unreasonably negative effects on what is now a sunny, sheltered suburb. Sunshine and the warmth of the sun have major benefits for both psychological and physical well-being, and apartments of at least 6 stories across Newtown would block the sun from the existing homes. Computer modelling shows that a single 6-story building casts shade across a whole block of low-rise homes, and it would only take a handful of these developments to affect the whole suburb. This isn't density done well. If you approve of enabling at least 6 stories, then no amount of design rules can realistically avoid negative effects when a developer chooses to build to this height. Houses that are warm and dry now risk become cold and damp, reducing the quality of life of occupants of all ages in the neighbouring flats and homes. Supporters of the plan tend to say that none of this matters when the primary need is for more homes. However, we advocate for a solution that provides homes while also keeping the qualities that make Newtown such a great place to live. We do sincerely want to see increased housing density that is done well, and we believe the proposal for building in and around the suburban centre could achieve this. Supposedly, the wide expanse of Type 4B housing through Newtown is required by the National Policy Statement Urban Development 2020. We believe this is a mistake. The planners have decided that all the so-called inner-city suburbs should be in the NPS catchment. The policy document itself says, in Policy 3C, that building heights of at least 6 stories are required within walking distance of existing and planned rapid transit stops, the edge of city centre zones and the edge of metropolitan centre zones. Newtown isn't close enough to be included as walkable to the central city. Okay, if we could move on, we would. Okay. Right, now that... you do it for me, Anna. Thanks, I don't know how. There we go. This slide shows being called an inner-city suburb as a consequence of being on the city side of the original town belt. And as this slide shows, it leads to the anomaly of Newtown and Berhampore being called inner-city suburbs, while, for instance, Brooklyn and Vogeltown and even Kilburn are outer suburbs. The fact that Kilburn, although more easily walkable to the city than Newtown, isn't in the NPS catchment, implies that the city planners do have some discretion over what is in and what is out. The remaining reason for inclusion is being walkable from existing and planned rapid transit stops. Rapid transit is defined in the NPS as a frequent, quick, reliable and high-capacity public transport service that operates on a permanent route that is largely separated from other traffic. This doesn't exist in Newtown and maybe never will, unless there is a huge investment in remodelling the whole area, it would need to share our streets with other traffic, making quick and largely separated from other traffic difficult to achieve. Rapid mass transit is talked about, but there is no business case yet, and no route for a future service has been decided once it moves beyond the hospital. We believe a plan means having decided a route and a timeline in the foreseeable future. Of course, if it came to pass from the CBD through Newtown to the eastern suburbs, the whole route, not just Newtown, should be in the NPS catchment. It's common sense that it's good to have housing and accessible to public transport. That's one reason for wanting increased density to be focused along the main transport routes of Adelaide Road and Ridderford Street. However, to extend from this to say that 6+ stories must be allowed in almost all of residential Newtown is going too far. Just one example of consequences. Even Carrara Park, our only park and playground in residential Newtown, could be surrounded by 6-storey homes. This detail makes us question the planner's commitment to a greener city. The words say Wellington's natural environment is protected, enhanced and integrated into the urban environment, but there is no evidence of the plan of this being put into practice. Consideration of the NPS leads us to conclude that this designation shouldn't apply to Newtown, but this wouldn't prevent high-rise buildings from being allowed in areas where these would be suitable. It would restore choices about what would work best here without needing complicated efforts to create exemptions. At the very least, decisions on the plan should be deferred until Let's Get Wellington Moving has presented its business case for rapid mass transit. I won't talk much longer. I'll just briefly mention a couple of issues. The character sub-areas, we think, complete opposition to Generation Zero, are too restrictive. Character protections have been removed from large areas of Newtown that the Boffa-Miskell report said that they do have coherent character. We are not committed to heritage and character at all costs. We recognise that well-designed new buildings can be the heritage of the future, and we would support resource consents that make it easier to get permission for remodelling so that an existing house can become a multi-unit dwelling or for constructing an additional tiny house on the same section. However, there are severe environmental and social costs with widespread demolition and replacing our current houses with high-rises. We're concerned that the environmental effects of demolition and rebuilding haven't been acknowledged in the planning. It's not, reducing emissions isn't just about transport. Building high-rises is very carbon intensive, and our existing houses represent a wide resource of embodied carbon in their natural timbers. I think I'll draw
Yeah, we
to a
do have a
close
few
there for
questions which you probably want
Yes,
to answer. So we're going to start with Councillor
and I'll put
Matthews and then Mayor
Anna's
Foster.
one back up because that might be something to ask about. Yeah.
Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora,
and then Mayor Foster.
and thanks for your submission. I was really interested with something that you said at the beginning, where you said that your submission was naturally very different from Generation Zero. And I just wanted to ask why that is.
You mean why it's different or why is it naturally? Because we do want to preserve the qualities that we think are important in our suburb, and their concern is actually about providing more housing regardless of how that affects things. Yeah.
Mayor Foster.
Yeah, you spend quite a lot of your time talking about the distance effectively from the central city. I see that. Now I'm going to ask you really your view about the other inner city suburbs which don't have that distance from the central city and are not reliant on whether there is or isn't a mass transit system. Have you got a view on how we should treat those in respect of the issues around character in particular and what the rules should be there?
I'd rather leave them to speak for themselves, because one of our things that we are wanting to focus on is promoting community design, where the actual communities and the local knowledge affects the decisions that are made, rather than outsiders having a look and saying, oh, you could put housing there or you could put housing there. Yeah.
Okay, and the second one is just in terms of the numbers of dwellings on this map here. You said it's an Anna question. Okay, you said about 2,000 potential homes in there if they were developed to the maximum.
That's. I'd be very happy to go over it in detail at some stage. This is additional to what's already there. That's on top of the existing shops and one layer of housing. Then if we went to 6 stories, and that just in that zone, allowing for some buffer on the edges, that would create more than 2,000 new homes additional to what's already there.
And is there anything that you think that will be needed to be done to encourage development of those? Because obviously there's an assumption that there's only a small proportion of take-up across, which is why, in part, why we've got a very large area.
That assumption of something like 15% take-up is when it's just left to random chance. There are property owners we've spoken to already who own properties here who would love to. In fact, one guy who owns 6 of those heritage shops who's been trying to work with council to do, because he needs to upgrade his building. It has to be upgraded anyway. And he's just been trying to go within the height limit, which is currently 4 stories, and been held back by the inconsistency of the application of the protecting his historic frontages, which he wants to do. So he needs to be able to work with the council in a constructive way, and if he can go to 6 stories instead of 4, it makes it a heck of a lot more viable for him to do that while protecting the frontages. And so we've spoken to other owners who are just waiting for the opportunity.
Okay, no, thank you.
Tēnā koroa, thank you very much for taking the time to kōrero with us. No mai Kirsty. Is Kirsty here? Thank you. Now, Kirsty's submission is on page 387. So, Kirsty, you've got 5 minutes. As you see, it does go very fast.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
And good morning. I'm going to talk about something which is totally different than the 2 people I've just heard speaking. I'm in an area in Mount Victoria where 4-storey buildings will be able to be built. I also live near the Wellington Monastery, and I feel very strongly that putting high-rise buildings in that area of Wellington and up to the back of Hawker Street to where Plymouth Park is probably not the right thing to do. Wellington's a beautiful city. It's got intrinsic value. People who come to Wellington to see our little small city, one of the best cities in the world, don't just look at the city itself, the cafes and the roads. They also look at the fact that we live between hills. We have little houses on our hills, and those of you will probably know that it's actually very unusual, and people come to Wellington and they comment on that. So I'm really just speaking up really for that area. It is the most photographed area in Wellington. It is also the most photographed area in New Zealand, and that I feel that to lose that eventually would not be the thing that anybody around this table would really, really want. It's too beautiful. It's what you see. You see our monastery, you see our hills, you see the green, you see the small buildings. And if our monastery was to be surrounded by concrete buildings, I think you would all look at it and your grandchildren would look at it and think, what the heck happened here? So I just ask you to think about the monastery and the surrounding areas there, because they are special, they're unique, and I think they should have more protection. So I hope you would like to consider that, please.
Councillor Sparrow has a question for you.
Yep, thank you for that. One of the young submitters last week said it could possibly come down to a choice between houses and people, and asked us how we would choose. How would you respond to that?
I would choose people, but I don't think that the council actually needs to destroy that particular vista so that there are more people there, because it's a very small area, and it's an area really which is part of Wellington. It's been there, people have admired it for a very long time.
Are there any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Thank you, Kirsty. Now I understand Clara has just arrived. Kia ora, Clara. Come and join us. So you've got 5 minutes, and there might be questions in that time if you have time for that. Clara is on page 370.
Right. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no whetirana, no airana, oku te puna, no te whanganui atara ahau. E tepu ake ahau ki raro e te manga o Matairangi, no reira ka mihi ki ngā whenua tapu o Ngāti Toa o te Ate Awa. Ko Holden, ko Brighton Moser tōku whānau, ko Clara Brighton Moser tōku ingoa. Thank you all for having me here today to discuss the draft spatial plan.
As a born and bred Newtowner, I'm speaking today with a particular focus on the impacts for that suburb. However, I'm really interested in the outcomes of this plan as a whole as we strive to make Wellington the most livable and vibrant city. I agree with many of the issues and the principles outlined in the draft spatial plan. Wellington is experiencing a housing crisis and we don't presently have enough warm and affordable housing. Creating well-functioning, high-density urban environments is essential for the growth of our city, but I do not believe this current proposal will meet these objectives. I oppose the spatial plan's proposal to allow the development of 6-storey plus buildings in large areas of Newtown's residential streets, and I oppose 6- and 4-storey buildings across most of Newtown and Berhampore. Successful intensification and higher density in cities requires good planning. Removing resource consent requirements and allowing the random location of taller buildings amongst these 1- to 2-storey character homes, I don't believe will automatically lead to more affordable and accessible housing. And I don't believe that town planning should be left to the decision of profit-motivated developers. I'd love to see a plan that understands concentrated areas of high-rise development should be planned rather than allowing random developments that are often small in scale and uncoordinated. We often hold up European cities for their ideal high density, but these are planned so that open space, architectural design, relationships between buildings, sunlight, and shared amenities are all considered carefully. Intensified housing should occur in the Newtown suburban centre with up to 6-storey apartments behind shop fronts and along the key transport spine as outlined in the Newtown Residents Association proposal, which I believe you have just heard. Semi-industrial and commercial land across Kent Terrace and Cambridge Terrace and Adelaide Road to John Street should be zoned for 6-storey multi-dwellings as they appear to be currently underutilised. These areas are along the bus routes and closer to the CBD, reducing car dependencies and allowing people access to the amenities of the city and the neighbourhood centres. I'm sure these areas would welcome more people as this contributes to thriving and viable businesses and communities. The current plan, however, does not consider existing communities and residents. Tall buildings amongst existing 1- to 2-storey neighbours will create environmental problems, including shaded homes and gardens and wind tunnels. And shade will make neighbouring houses damp and cold, reducing the quality of living and affecting those who live there currently and their health. I don't believe this is sustainable development. Additionally, these 1- to 2-storey timber dwellings in Newtown and across Wellington are resilient and have survived 100+ years of earthquakes and storms. These native timbers represent a great deal of embodied energy and sequestered carbon. Many have been upgraded and developed over time, which is more environmentally sustainable than replacing them. This has also resulted in a mix of styles and periods, which contributes to Wellington's unique heritage and character. Heritage and character protection is not only relevant in intact and consistent areas. I think the spatial plan needs to recognise and appreciate the vibrancy of these inner suburbs and rich fabric that Wellington is made up of. Resource consent should absolutely be required to demolish any pre-1930 dwelling in the inner suburbs, not just within the token residential heritage pockets that are proposed to be protected. I believe that with clever, responsible and thoughtful town planning, which has a focus on intensifying housing along key transport routes and underutilised semi-industrial areas, we can make Wellington a beloved, thriving and functioning urban environment which supports and provides for current and future residents, families, local communities, businesses and the environment. I look forward to seeing an alternative plan worked up that considers all of these factors and seeing how you engage with the local communities. Thank you.
Kia ora. Are there any questions? You've been very clear. Thank you. Mayor Foster, try and make it quick.
Just quickly, how would you best see that engagement with the local community happening? Think about it in a Newtown context.
I think in the Newtown context, there is a very clear, strong community group that can be worked with. And I think that conversations in the initial stages of writing up those and listening to what they believe the local community needs and where in the suburb those developments might be best suited, because there are big stretches that could be developed.
Cool, thank you. Well done.
Kia ora. Thank you, Clara, for coming in. I don't think Philippa is here yet. She's not actually due to submit till 11:40. I wonder if we might take our. Well, we get out of time anyway. We get out of sync because we might just start our break now, and we'll come back at 11:45.
I am here.
That's good. It's just we can't ask someone to come up if you're talking. Right, I'd like to welcome Philippa Williams. Kia ora, Philippa. Thank you for coming in. So you've got 5 minutes. Page 403.
Good morning, Philippa Williams from living in Hobson Crescent in Thorndon, and welcome the opportunity to be able to talk to you all. I understand that you need higher density housing, but I think making the Thorndon streets in a city is a little bit ill-conceived. I note in the spatial plan it says that the west side of Thorndon should not be high density house because the earthquake risk of the fault running along the motorway. I'm not quite sure why the east side is any different from the west side. And as I'm probably sure the council is aware, I'm told that 23 six-storey plus houses in Thorndon have either had to be demolished or needed very, very serious remedial work, including places like St Paul's apartments, Kate Shepherd's apartments, etc. So why a 6+ storey building, and some of these are relatively new, I'm not sure that we should be building 6+ stories in the Thorndon area, given the history of the Kaikoura earthquake. We have special heritage status in Hobson Street and Hobson Crescent, and I gather that if they become in a city, we will lose that special character. A lot of these these homes were reverted to flats in the sort of 30s and 40s, and they have been beautifully restored to a very, very high standard. And probably apart from Oriental Bay, it's probably the most expensive real estate in Wellington. And I think if you think that we are going to live in our houses amongst high-rise buildings, that isn't going to happen. You're going to see what's happened in Pipitea Street and Motoroa Street, where everybody's moved out and those houses are now used for commercial purposes. And also, of course, we're all going to be very tempted to sell our houses and allow developers to come in and demolish them, because I imagine that they will be worth an absolute fortune for the price of the land. So, and I don't think that you will find people continually living in them if they've got high rises there. I also would like to refer to the parking. I assume if it's in a city, there will be metered parking, just like the rest of the inner city. Well, you know, most of our houses don't have garages. We do have to park on the street. And we also have 4 schools, and we have Wellington Girls, Thorndon School, Queen Margaret School, and daycare, all within less than 50 metres of my house. And if anyone's ever been round there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll know what an absolute shambles it is. They're narrow streets, and I'm not sure how you're going to cope with more traffic. I expect that you are not expecting people to have cars living in those, but there's still a lot of services come along with a 6+ storey building. It is a magnificent streetscape, and these 2 streets are the only streets that I know of in Wellington that are purely merchant houses. So you've got all the cottages in Mount Vic, you've got the lovely cottages on the other side of the road in Thorndon, but these were the merchant houses, and there are merchants' houses around Wellington, but not dedicated streets like there are in Hobson Crescent and Hobson Street, and they are so revered that the overseas tourists jump on buses to come and gawk at our, lovely homes. So I do think that, and also I think that once high-rise buildings go in there, block our sun, that it just won't be have the same residential community feel about it that it does at the moment. And just to wrap up, I just want to say that there is. I know that the people that own those houses won't be still there. They will revert back to flats or they will be sold. So, you know, you're going to be getting rid of some amazing heritage in Wellington if you go down that path of doing that.
Oh, kia ora, Philippa. Thank you for coming into kōrero with us today. We've not got time for questions, but thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Johanna Drayton. Kia ora, Johanna. You've got 5 minutes as well. Page 288.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Johanna Drayton aho. You will have my written submission before you, and as democracy is, I get 5 minutes, so I will make it quick. I oppose the spatial plan as it currently stands. I believe there has been inadequate evidence to support the current drafting of it. The statistical analysis is flawed and incorrect, and when we have sought through Lagoima requests further information, we're told by council that in fact much of it doesn't exist and it hasn't been provided. The population analysis is overstated. I have resided at 80 Austin Street for many decades now. I wish to support sustainable and appropriate quality development in the appropriate parts of the inner city, such as towards the city end of Mount Victoria, where there are already some apartments, less character, and sunlight will not be so impacted. Where there is some infrastructure and your council workers are working busily down at the bottom of Mount Victoria at the moment. Where I live in Mount Victoria, there is a lack of proper infrastructure. We still have overhead wires, powers. We have huge fire risk, which is somewhat hidden, but is on your watch. There is a huge fire risk in Mount Victoria, well known, particularly with those overhead wires. And if you have high density housing in the manner you are proposing, there is a tragedy waiting to happen in my view. There is a better way forward and a balance is required. I ask the councillors to put aside their predetermination and to actually step back and try and bring a balance, a wisdom to the table. I ask you to consider the heritage and character of Mount Victoria, which will be lost forever to future generations under your watch if this continues. There are appropriate places throughout the inner city of Wellington where sustainable housing can be built and where there are better infrastructures and where character won't be lost forever. Mount Victoria is a very special character area where many people enjoy not just the residents but also the public and also all of the overseas visitors that come there. The historic Mount Victoria stock, once demolished, destroyed, put together between haphazard housing, will never be able to be replaced. You are talking about over 100-year-old houses, the heritage of our people. The tangata te whenua and the European population deserve better. They deserve you to protect their character and their culture whilst providing for the public in an appropriate way. The sub-areas currently proposed are too limited in my respectful submission, and they should be extended. There is the Pyrie Street as you go up to the Mount Vic Tunnel. As you turn right down onto Austin Street, there are beautiful character buildings on both sides of the street, right up to the Alice Street. That, in my view, should be protected. I do mention again Council's current statistical analysis. There is a lack of correlation and rationale behind it. Taking the Stats NZ median population growth figure, equating that to housing demand and deducting the housing capacity, there would appear to be a shortfall of 4,615 dwellings over 30 years, or just 153 dwellings per year city-wide. Council has not shown there is a material shortfall in housing capacity over the next 30 years.
Kia ora, Johanna. You've run out of time now.
To justify that. So I urge you all to strike that correct balance between ensuring that the appropriate housing is created for future generations, but ensuring character is retained. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Briscoe. Kia ora, Jonathan. So, Jonathan, you've got 5 minutes, and his submission's on page 292.
Section 82 of the Local Government Act requires the local authority to receive the views of any person who will or may be affected by a decision with an open mind and be given due consideration. Given the comments made by some councillors, one has to be concerned whether that will in fact occur. Where a councillor insults submitters by calling them knobs, one is entitled to be sceptical. You've heard submissions from a large number of people expressing concern as that the rushed nature of the process, the lack of depth in research, and the lack of real data. How many houses are needed, for example? What alternatives are available? I don't wish to repeat what has been said already. My submissions is an example of the direct impact of the plan changes, of a person affected. In 2017, we purchased our home in Scarborough Terrace, Mount Victoria. It was done with the intention of retiring to Wellington to be with our family in 2019. And that's what we did. After 50 years of hard work, we relocated from Rotorua to Mount Victoria. We had previously lived in Wellington during our university years, that is my wife and I. And Mount Victoria had always appealed to us because of its distinctive character. We did our research. One of the documents we looked at was the Council's Residential Design Guide, as it was our intention to carry out extensive renovations. We read comments such as, the significance of Mount Victoria to the city. Mount Victoria, and this is your document, is a highly visible inner city residential suburb that forms an important backdrop to the city. Mount Victoria has a distinctive character that makes a considerable contribution to Wellington's collected identity. And it then goes on to being one of the early settlement areas in Wellington with a high proportion of the original building still remaining. Mount Victoria is significant as a reasonably intact, large area characteristic of the early development of Wellington. And in terms of Scarborough Terrace, it's specifically referred to because it is one of the sub-areas which possesses special character significance. We tamed a LIM report. There was nothing to suggest any concerns or impending changes to the zoning of the area. It did show that considerable cost and challenges would be met by anyone wanting to get a resource consent to change the character. Even to get minor changes, people had been put to great expense. We had plans prepared to, using the existing footprint. We had considered about going up, but we soon had to put that aside because of the special character, and that is from the street, the houses on our side had to look like they were single story. So we didn't go ahead with that, but we went ahead and did the alterations based on our confidence in the documentation that we had received, that what we were going to get was a house that had a lovely view and sunlight. Our renovations have now been completed, and it was during that process of completion that we've learnt about this planned change to the spatial plan. We are distressed at that because it really effectively destroys or could destroy what we have achieved. Although our street doesn't change in its character, Austin Street, which we overlook, and Porritt Street do. So we could have a 4-storey plus building going up between us and the city, which is where we get our view from. So what I am saying is, don't rush. There are financial consequences to people, and this council has to take into those financial consequences into account when making this decision. We were recently able to go to the old St Paul's, and one just has to reflect on that building. At one stage, it was going to be destroyed, but a few people came out of the woodwork and protested, and now you have a treasure that is appeals to many, many people.
All right. Kia ora, Jonathan, you have run out of time.
Right. Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast. Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast. That's a quote from William Shakespeare. That's what I'm asking this council to do. Go slow.
Kia ora. I'd like to welcome John Bryce. Know my John? Kia ora. So, John, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's John Bryce. I'm a Aro Valley resident. I'm opposed to the plan as it is at the present because I think it's poorly conceived and based on some flawed ideas. I believe that before you move forward with a spatial plan, you need to quantify what is a quality building, what is a quality dwelling, not just go ahead and decide the space needs to be filled up. One of the things that is very obvious in Wellington is when it was planned, a quality building required a metre or more setback from the boundary on both sides. So we've got a whole lot of buildings that are conceived in time when there was no sound insulation or fire insulation possible between dwellings, and we have a space that in most cases represents 2 or in 2 stories, 4 bedroom space at each of those dwellings. Perhaps council could think about filling that space up with residential space rather than dark, damp, unusable space. I believe that in Holloway Road in the first district scheme plan in the 1990s, we had a very good set of building rules that required that the next door neighbour couldn't build if he was going to shade your sunny, usable space. And I think that the concept that council are putting forward at the moment is that first in, first served, whoever decides to build a 4-storey building can shade whoever they like, can ruin whoever they like. Would any of you want to look out on a wall from your own homes to the north where your sun comes from? I don't believe you would. I believe that that we all value in Wellington the sunshine hours that we get because they're relatively low. I live in a valley, and in the bottom of the valley that's further restricted by the hills, and at the time when in the middle of winter I get sun on my house from about 11 till 2. Now build something directly to the north of my house and I will get no sun whatsoever. In Aro Valley, you're proposing a possible 8-storey building next door to Aro Park. That would shade effectively all of the sun in summer into that park. So, okay, I'm harping on about sunshine, but I believe that sunshine and views are a part of a quality building, and I believe that quality space is what we need to work towards, not just more cheap space. The need for more cheap space, as far as I can see, is based on an assumption that was made several years ago when council was trying to justify not having enough rates. And maybe we could have a good look at how many more cheap spaces we need. As I say, I believe that we need quality space, and I believe that the plan as it stands is putting the horse before the cart. I could go on, but you're running late, and I've said enough. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor O'Neill.
No.
Oh. Yeah, kia ora, thank you. Oh.
John.
All good? No problem. No, it's all good. I promise just a short one. You spoke about quality space. Can you see any other quality spaces that could be developed within your suburb or near?
Well, for example, in Holloway Road, the proposal is that we're only allowed single dwellings that are freestanding of 1 and 2 stories. Now, the hillside is fairly steep, and it leaves itself really open to building terraced houses up the hills, rather than a single dwelling with a metre on each side of it. We should be able to fill in those spaces completely with perhaps car parks if it's necessary, and then have terrace housing that goes up where we live on the next door neighbour's roof. Something more modern than a single freestanding building. Just one example.
Yeah.
I could go on. Okay.
Oh, kia ora, John. Thank you very much for coming and answering our questions too. I'd like to welcome Rob Brown and Di Jordan. Looks like it might just be Rob.
Brown.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So you have 5 minutes.
Busy. Right.
Page 391.
Right. Shall I? Ready? Look, Di and I are, we are long-term residents in Mount Victoria. We moved in there over 40 years ago, which was not long after Melksham Towers was built on the corner of Ellis Street and Brougham Street. Now, Melksham Towers, the Williams Group built it, and it was a 10-storey building that went up in a rush. And, you know, I can say that people, it was totally out of character and dwarfed the scale of the housing in the area. And what happened, there was angry protests, people, it was in the media, people lay in front of bulldozers, a huge public outcry. Now, we didn't manage to stop the building of Melksham Towers, but what that did was it galvanised the community and led to, sort of a protests and concerns about the scale of buildings that were appropriate for Mount Victoria. Now, as I say, we didn't manage to stop Melksham Towers, but the council, I think, heard the concerns of residents. And, soon after you get implemented the pre-1930s rule, and no new Melksham Towers type buildings have gone up in Mount Victoria in the last 45 years. It has actually achieved, and what I'm saying is that the regime that came after that has actually served the community pretty well. Sympathetic developments and renovations have continued and are ongoing. We have got consistent increases in density occurring in what is already one of New Zealand's most dense suburbs. So that everybody that goes into Mount Victoria understands density, but and they live in a high density suburb already. But I guess the other thing is that the current regime has allowed this appreciation of the special contribution of Mount Victoria's heritage to Wellington. And you can see in so many Wellington City Council brochures and leaflets, there's the shot of Mount Victoria. And the community has flourished. My concern is that the spatial plan, as it's conceived, won't achieve its objectives in Mount Victoria. And there's a number of reasons I've got for that. Multi-storey developments will build shade walls right throughout it and will destroy the character. Once it's gone, Mount Victoria's gone forever. As you'll be aware, 750 Mount Victoria residents, that was renters and owners, signed a petition opposing the plan. So it was actually unanimous concern. Stripping people's rights will give unbridled power to the developers. The current rules have actually provided an opportunity for people to have their say when they're going to be adversely affected by developments that are going up there. It's a bit of a handbrake. I don't think that having some sort of taking away people's rights to complain about their issue with putting in some sort of experts advice panel, I don't think it's going to compensate for what you're taking away. Multi-storey apartments will be healthier. Some people have said that, we've got to get rid of these pre-30s buildings because they're unhealthy. This is really interesting. I went around Mount Victoria and looked at the major buildings developments that have occurred in the last 20 years. 96 Austin Street, 63, 65 Austin Street, Victoria Villas, Lawson Place. There's nearly 200 new buildings, new developments have occurred. All of those ones have been leaky buildings, have had to be reclad. Whereas the pre-30s buildings have been seen renovation and so on. So I think you can't say that new buildings are going to be healthier. The other thing is that, we're looking at a spatial plan that will provide better housing for lower income and students in that. When I looked around at the new developments in Mount Victoria, overwhelmingly what they do is they are they're expensive apartments, and there's no evidence that they're actually housing low-income people or students. Where low-income people and students live in Mount Victoria is in the large houses, and the plan will largely, they will be the ones that will get bulldozed. So just in summary, I want to say...
Just going to have to stop, so might have to make it only a few words.
Yep. You desperately need to build community trust in Mount Victoria for what you're doing. We're in favour of a phased approach. We think there's some real doubt about the numbers, about what the forecast growth is, and we think you've got the Central City and Adelaide Road, they're all zoned for high density, and get on and do it, and look at increasing in the inner city suburbs when you work out what the actual numbers are and what you need. Okay.
I have to call it to a stop now. Kia ora, Rob. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and kōrero with us. No mai Roland Sapsford. Welcome, Roland. So you have 5 minutes as well.
Here you go. Always like to give you...
Kia ora.
Talking. There's a brief mihi at the back. We don't really have time for these things here. Tēnā koutou e ngā rangatira. There are a few things on which I think most of us agree. House prices are rising quickly, and most houses belong to people who already own more than one home. Buying a house is hard for most people now and has been hard for almost 2 decades. Wellington rents are expensive compared with median income, and there is a shortage of rental space. Housing quality, especially dampness, is a problem for New Zealand houses, and done well, compact urban form has many benefits. Knowing the problem is half the challenge. What we need now are solutions that work in practice. The arguments for the approach in the spatial plan can be summarised as follows. High prices are caused by lack of housing construction. Housing construction is constrained by a lack of available land. Removal of demolition controls and height limits frees up land. Developers then rapidly create more housing, and over time, competition drives prices down to an affordable level. So, starting from the top, is there a lack of housing construction? Our stock of dwellings has grown faster than our population in recent years, and most notably in the character areas where housing grew faster than the rest of the city. Builders are going flat out, but many new dwellings have been pitched to the top quarter of the housing market and bought by investors. What Wellington needs instead is new affordable housing insulated from national drivers of high prices. The spatial plan is way off target here. As for land, well, the council could inventory at least the following underutilised capacity: vacant land used extensively for parking or vehicle storage, vacant commercial buildings suitable for residential conversion, land occupied by low-rise, low-quality post-1960 commercial buildings. Even a cursory look at Google Earth suggests that these offer more than enough capacity in the right places to support climate and people-friendly intensification. But targeting and sequencing development rather than deregulation is a key to realising this potential. What about demolition controls? Aren't they the most evil manifestation of entrenched privilege since inherited peerages? Well, no. Let me tell you a story. In Point Chev in Auckland, there were two large two-storey Victorian villas sitting side by side, owned by a church trust. Each comfortably and happily housed large families, between 10 and 12 people spanning 3 generations. Property prices reached the point where the church sold the villa. The families moved out, the villas went, and 2 5-storey apartment blocks were built. Each had 5 2-bedroom apartments. This is the spatial plan dream, except average occupancy for a 2-bedroom apartment in Auckland is 1.3 people. 2 5-storey apartments, 13 people. 2 2-storey villas, 22 people. More height, less housing, and lower density. If you think that's extreme, pick a 2-storey flat on Are Street. 4 to 6 people living in a villa replaced by a 3 to 4-storey apartment block housing, and let's be generous, maybe 5 to 7, probably much wealthier people. This isn't about overcrowding, it's about how space is used in a building. Newtown and Aro Valley are already towards the high end of medium density for this reason. Put simply, demolishing existing houses reduces the housing stock. New capacity comes with a housing cost. Demolish and rebuild generally benefits landowners and property developers far more than those who need housing. Again, targeted intensification focused on sites where there is no housing is a far faster way to increase the housing stock. So what about housing quality? So here's a list with the names removed of every suburb ranked by the percentage of rental homes that are sometimes or always damp. The yellow suburbs are character areas. Some are poor performers. Others are doing pretty well compared with the city as a whole, the green number. That's the same for all the other suburbs. Allowing developers to cherry-pick sites across the city is unlikely to fix dampness. For a start, the dampest locations are unlikely to be the first choice for shiny new developments. There's hardly a rush to redevelop those sites outside the character areas at the moment. Cold and damp is a really serious problem, but it has little to do with character suburbs and demolition rules. Rather, we need real action to enforce the healthy home standards citywide. Our district plan is not the cause of our housing problems. Rather, it's our lack of a housing plan. Heritage and housing can go hand in hand if we have the will. In Appendix 1, I start to sketch what a 5-year plan might look like. We can do this, but we need to work together. That starts at the top. That starts with you. Then the rest of us can help. Ngā mihi katoa.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you very much, Roland, for coming in to share your thoughts with us. Appreciate that.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'd like to welcome Daniel Coffey from Thatcher Crescent Residents. Kia ora, Daniel.
Thank you. Hand those down. Hand those down. Have a laser pointer on this? Probably not. No, I'd be risk. Do you want me to? So, yeah, no, that's all right. That's fine, that's fine. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I'm from the Thatcher Residents representing Thatcher Crescent residents, and we approve, I guess, up to a point of the draft spatial plan, which we just feel it can be done a lot better. And I think a lot of our views are probably consistent with the views of some of the people here that have been speaking previously. So we understand the council's just giving effect to the National Property Statement for property thing for urban development, but we believe it's a very, very blunt instrument and it's not in a sense of the local situations. I've been hearing a lot of that with the other submissions. Accordingly, we believe the council just needs to be a lot smarter about its implementation. And we believe, much as other people have suggested, adopting a staged approach consistent with the goals of the National Property Statement Objective 6B, which hasn't really been mentioned here. It involves ranking suburbs for development, which is again consistent with the National Property Statement, where they've ranked local authorities in terms of tiers 1, 2 and 3, and we don't really see why suburbs and areas can't be ranked similarly. So in addition to the access to transport, we consider capacity of the development to enhance or detract from local environment. And it was quite interesting to hear the Newtown Residents Association. There were areas where they felt development would really enhance the environment, and that was along the transport routes and so on. But there were areas also where they felt that it was much more likely to detract from development and from their local environment. And certainly in the suburbs, there's areas like Simla Crescent, putting an 8-storey building, because remember, this is 6 stories plus. It's not just 6 stories, it's 6 stories plus. Putting an 8-storey building in Simla Crescent would completely change the nature of that area and not really do anything other than just provide a building there. Having said that, if you were to put that in Johnsonville or in Kilburnie or places like that, I mean, Johnsonville and Kilburnie are struggling. These shopping centres are in trouble. And putting these buildings and developments there would provide a lot more people, which would aid those areas and develop those, which is much the same as what the Newtown residents were saying. So we believe that, it's all very well to talk about minimum 6-storey developments with no requirements for car parking, but we believe they should only be permitted where occupants can enjoy a great lifestyle without cars. That must be added to the mix. So the key issues, doing nothing is not an option. We accept that. There's no question about that. But we believe the 80,000 figure needs revisiting. Due to the impacts of COVID-19, we have seen quite a societal shift, and the modelling of the 80,000 is based on is simply obsolete. So that 80,000 figure in the draft spatial plan really needs to be re-evaluated. The indiscriminate dotting of 6-storey apartments across the suburbs, across the city, is just reckless. I'm sorry, I'd use the term reckless. And, we've seen that in Newtown, just by opening the whole area up and saying, okay, here, there, and so on. You will get 6-storey plus apartments in areas where it's not going to be most beneficial, and you'll probably miss out on them in areas where there is. So we recommend an approach which is much smarter, consistent with the NPS Objective 6B, which states local authority decisions are strategic over the medium and long term. And this is what a staged approach is about. So we looked at the objectives of the National Policy Statement, we looked at the objectives of the draft spatial plan, and then we looked at what we considered what our objectives would be. Now, as far as we can see, certainly in the suburbs area, the only objective that seems to be considered is Objective 3B, well serviced by existing or planned public transport. 6B is completely ignored, strategic over the medium and long term. Now, if you look at the draft spatial plan, compact, Wellington builds on its urban form with quality development in the right locations. I think a lot of the submitters here today would really feel quite, that's not being achieved. And we certainly don't believe it can be achieved just by focusing on the requirements of 3B for well serviced by existing planned or public transport. So when we've had a look at it, the Thatcher Crescent residents have said, well, what do we actually want for our city? Well, we want to be creating great places to live, walk and play. That's important to us. Building for a walkable future, that's also important to us. Enjoying great lifestyles without cars. Right now, you're just saying, we're going to build them and you won't be able to have cars, but we want to be able to enjoy people living without cars. And when these developments are built, we want them to enhance the local environment and not detract from it, and benefit the area. And really, we don't want you just putting these things up willy-nilly. We want them to maintain the existing areas where possible, because we shouldn't do this unless it's absolutely necessary to do so. So we believe that the DSP is still somewhat a pre-COVID solution in a post-COVID world, and it needs visiting. Specifically, the 80,000 estimate, I thought there'd been more comment on that here, but there has been some effect. So I'll elaborate on that a little bit more. Firstly, there's the Zoom effect. People are working away from home, working remotely. In my own family, I have my wife and my son. They both live at home, obviously. But whereas they used to go to work 5 days a week each, they're now doing 3 days and 2 days respectively. So they're just simply not going to town as much as they used to. The central city's emptying out. I mean, people are developing apartments, offices are closing, people are relocating, and what you're seeing is those are being converted into apartments. So once again, it puts doubt on this 80,000 people figure. Tertiary education is being offered online. My daughter's just completed her 4th year in study. The first 3 years of study, she went off to university every day. No problems at all, hopped on the train, went into town and went to university, 30 minutes door to door. Once it became available remotely, she barely went there. Now, if a person who's only got 30 minutes to get to her classes can't be bothered going, imagine those people coming in from Napier, Gisborne, Blenheim, Nelson. They're not going to come here anymore. Now, we know, in all fairness, this needs time to play out. We have got to see what's going to happen over the next couple of years. But all this piling into inner city flats by students, that may disappear. But we don't know that, do we? And lastly, this is my personal one, was driverless cars. There's loads of speculation, but nobody really knows for sure. But what we can say is they're going to be here in the next 10 years, and they'll be ubiquitous by 2050. And the impact of that is yet to be seen. So from our point of view, we have to do something, we agree. But consistent with the objective 6B, we recommend a staged approach. Okay, we suggest starting with the central city and moving to hubs like Johnsonville, Newtown, and Newtown in line with what's been suggested by the Newtown Residents Association. But as I said, that figure of 80,000 is very much in doubt. So what we're suggesting is adopt a softly approach. Don't just rush in and do the whole thing kabang like has been suggested in the draft spatial plan. Work through it bit by bit. And in that space is we're recommending the following approach. A stage approach like this. You'll see stage 1, we're saying easy walking within 15 minutes to the CBD, and by the CBD we mean Lambton Quay or Courtenay Place and so on. We would say that's the first area for development. Stage 2, easy walking within 10 minutes of comprehensive shopping and amenities. And that's much like the hubs, what we can call the hubs. And stage 5, without taking you through it, we would say these areas are, they're good access to transport, but people will be more inclined to want or need cars because really beyond being close to transport, I mean, it's not that easy to just hop on a train to go everywhere if you want to go to the supermarket or something. So people will be more inclined to want or need cars. We've come up with this very brief overview. Now, people would disagree or agree. I think stage 1 and stage 2, we would recommend those be opened up immediately for development. Again, taking into account the concerns and the recommendations of the Newtown Residents Association and similar organisations. And similarly, we would say stage 5, that would probably be something that you'd leave. They'd be the last cab off the rank. They may have to be developed at some stage depending on the population that comes into the area. But we would work through them on that stages. But there's no point in going through and change the nature of studbs like Karori, Kandala, unless it's necessary to do so. I'm not saying they're off the agenda, but not unless it's used to do so. So in summary, it's recognised we have to do something. The 80,000 figure needs revisiting. The indiscriminate of dotting of 6-storey apart is reckless, and consistent with the objective of Section B, we recommend minimum storey buildings of no should only be permitted. Now, essentially, we want to build structures not where people can't have a car park, but where people neither want nor need their cars. That should be the objective of this draft spatial plan. Thank you.
Kia ora. I think we really are on time. Councillor Pennant, you're going to have to get straight to the question.
Thank you for saying that thing about not having cars. So people in Crofton Downs can use public transport generally, or you think they should just mostly stay within the neighbourhood?
Sorry?
Sorry, the point about not needing cars.
Yeah.
So you're saying that people will use public transport, or they'll be staying in the local neighbourhood and to do their work and leisure activities?
Well, I'm saying for most of their life, they should be able to live comfortably in their local neighbourhood. Now, if you take Johnsonville, for instance, imagine we do have a development there. People will be able to take down the lift. They'll have immediate access to the mall, across the road to the swimming pools, across the road to the library, across the road to the parks. They won't need their cars for most things. Yeah, they hop on the train to go to work and back. But that's as I say, these developments should enhance the local environment. They should contribute to the local environment as just being places for people to go and doss down at night.
Tēnā koe, Daniel. Thank you very much. Kia ora. I'd like to welcome Kaya and Michael from Forest and Bird Youth. Kia ora korua. Thank you for coming in. So you have 10 minutes because you're an organisation. There will likely be some questions. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Kaya. I'm from Forest and Bird Youth. I'm the national co-coordinator of the organisation and a long-standing member of the group. Michael and I would like to speak to you on behalf of our team in Wellington and our youth supporters across the country. We would like to show our support for the proposed plan, and we believe this is a genuine step in the right direction. However, there exists a significant opportunity to not only take steps to improve, but to radically transform our city. At this time, we have the potential to reduce excessively high housing and transport costs, reduce emissions around the places we live and work, thereby improving air quality and human health, and truly incorporate nature into the heart of our city. This is absolutely essential in maintaining our city as a vibrant, lively, unique attraction for generations to come. The realisation of this potential will be limited by the proposed character protections, which are currently excessive and will maintain damp, cold buildings with extortionate energy costs for residents and unnecessary impact on the planet. Elements of heritage sites should be maintained in an appropriate way, whether this is through retrofitting with efficient, sustainable structures or maintaining the facade and whilst developing behind without detriment to sustainable development. The plan should also emphasise that all capital and operational developments must be sustainable with energy-efficient design and easy access to reliable and sustainable transport modes. These developments should be created to centre around nature in the urban environment, not the other way around. Wellington can be built to be a world-leading centre with green space, waterways and native New Zealand biodiversity throughout the city. With the removal of cars from the central city, the streets could be prioritised for safe walking and cycling, with improved air quality and minimal pollution. This proposed future highlights the crucial need to put nature at the heart of all decision-making, and the next generation who will bear the brunt of these decisions needs to be consulted and engaged with at every step. A plan that incorporates youth and nature is far more likely to succeed in the long term, in regards both to the changing environment and New Zealand's economical climate. Incorporating ecosystem and biodiversity into our city design will create transformational change of our society. Through improved amenity, people will be able to engage with nature throughout their day, improving physical and mental health. More resilient infrastructure will be adapted to increasingly drastic climate change impacts, and increased carbon sequestration and reduced emissions will mitigate those impacts here in New Zealand and in our vulnerable neighbouring Pacific communities. With sufficient forethought and vision, Wellington could become a world-leading city that countries around the globe aspire to. In this new spatial plan, we could be taking the next step to a greener, more sustainable New Zealand. Noho ora mai. I'll now pass over to my colleague Michael, who's the co-coordinator of the Wellington branch.
Kia ora Kaya. One thing that really stands out to me is the need for Wellington to be a world leader in terms of green spaces and urban environments. The requirement for green spaces is massive in terms of the mental health benefit, and as a youth group, we understand the extreme role that mental health plays in our society. Stress reduction caused by nature is magnificent. It allows for a cognitive unwind. You're basically relaxing and looking at what's going on in front of you rather than worrying about what's happening at work or with the family. It's a rare opportunity for us to take a break. So incorporating nature into Wellington City is a must goal, but more so for young people than for anyone else, particularly our children. The average unstructured play in outdoors areas for young people in the United States has fallen to 4 to 7 minutes a day. That's less than 10 minutes spent outdoors and about 7 hours in front of a screen every single day. Time outdoors is a rare opportunity for children to access natural vitamin D. The exercise reduces obesity rates in youth, and they have a stronger emotional well-being when they go into school. Further, the ability to experience nature, such as in Wellington, the 60% of people who now record seeing tui regularly, and of course the famous return of the kaka, leads for people to care about nature. You only care about what you experience in your day-to-day life. Excitingly, now 30% of Wellington citizens who responded to a Zealandia poll participate in predator control. And fascinatingly, this was associated with lower levels of depression, lower levels of stress, and greater feelings of social cohesion. It's therefore vital that in any spatial plan we put a priority on green spaces in urban areas. Further, any action that goes on from here must incorporate the word from the Climate Commission and a youth voice. It's vital that these two groups have the opportunity to voice their opinions on how Wellington will be shaped for the future. Changes that will happen now will affect us as young people more than anyone else. We're the ones who will live here when the driverless cars arrive. We're the ones who will live there when a new railway line is put in. And so it's vital that we're the ones who know what it's going to look like and how it will work. We wholeheartedly support the retention of iwi representatives and Environment Court judges, and ask that in the interest of partnership approach, iwi judges and iwi reps and judges co-chair the committees. It's important that we involve tikanga Māori to ensure that what we're doing is the right way forward for everybody, not just the few. Finally, I'd like to offer my piece as a student on the special character statements. I noted the comments earlier that in intense apartment buildings there is a lower rate of residence on property. That can be avoided if they are tailored towards students. I lived in a hostel with 300 students in it. Te Puni has about 450. You can condense students very conveniently by offering them the opportunity, and then you reduce the strain in places like Aro Valley, Karori, Highbury, by encouraging students to live in those areas. And you're getting students out of the places that are moulding, old, and need that, what's the word for when you do up a house? Yeah, clean. Renovation, that's what I was looking for. Because a student's not going to be able to afford a new kitchen or bathroom, but a family who lives in the property and who intends on living on that property not for a year or 2 years, but for the life and for the life of their children, will do up those properties. So if you want renovation, and if you want those areas with the character to survive, then we need to find a new place for students to live, and I suggest that can best be achieved by intensification in urban areas. Thank you very much. That's all I've got to say. Ngā mihi for listening, and we're open to questions.
Kia ora, we do have some pātai. Our first one is from Me Foster.
Thank you both very much. My question is, it's twofold. One is the value of not just green space, but vegetation, trees, etc., and how you would deal with that in terms of intensification, the site coverage in particular, because if you take the whole site over in buildings, then clearly there's no space for vegetation to support the natural environment. And the second one is we've had very, very few people who have commented at all about the significant natural areas part of the plan. I wonder if you had any comment on that.
I'll start with the first question. It's much more my area of knowledge. As someone who walks, one of the things that I've loved about moving to Wellington is the convenience of anywhere that I walk, I can choose to go through a bush. So if I'm walking from the city up to, I used to live at Warehouse or the university, you can pass through the little bush park that I've forgotten the name of, behind Culbin Park.
Right, yep.
You can also, say, walk along the motorway, and there's plantings along the motorway there. I think that the plans to open up Lambton Quay and hopefully have more tree plantings along there, these are all great opportunities.
I was actually thinking more about private vegetation on property.
That's a little bit tougher. I think that it's got to be it's a tough one. In terms of the inner city, you can do green walls, which are an interesting innovation, particularly in European cities. And then in the suburbs, it's just ensuring that there are curbsides with trees and the like, because if you're going to intensify, you are going to lose out in vegetation in some places. Kaya, did you want to comment on the sustainable?
Sure. Yeah, so your second question was around
the significant natural areas, which is,
Absolutely. So we really appreciate in the plan you seem to highlight that we do need these natural spaces. They are very important to all of us for our mental and physical health during our days. And just because you're intensifying, as Michael said, that doesn't mean you can't leave space for green spaces. If you're having more people in a smaller space, then surely there should be more space for greenery and as you say, biodiversity. If we engage engage with these biodiversity and the birds and trees in our own city, then we'll be able to connect with them better in our everyday lives rather than just having on the weekend go out to some park. And if it's right there, it will be much better. And so I really appreciate in the plan that you have highlighted that. We, of course, would like that to be further intensified. There should be more.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Go with Deputy Mayor Free hasn't asked a question yet.
Just quickly, I was listening very intently to what you both said, and I think, are you making a case that this needs to be really well planned?
Yeah, it does
badly planned.
It does need to be very rigorous, and it needs to involve a lot of youth consultation about how the future of the city will look. It needs to be quite intense and for the
And
future.
interestingly enough, I think a lot of other submitters have said the same thing in a different way, that you can't leave this to just happen by chance. It has to be really well planned and even quite well managed. Thanks. Yeah.
Kia ora. Tēnā kōrua, thank you very much for coming into kōrero with us today. Appreciate that. Nau mai Emma Osborne. Kia ora, Emma. So Emma, you have 5 minutes. It does go quite fast. If you do want to allow a minute in there for questions, that would be good. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Jill. Kia ora koutou. My name's Emma, and really I'm here because I have a 6-year-old, and climate change conversations are increasingly part of just the background of our life, and that really concerns me. I am here to support the spatial plan and encourage it to go further in removing or reducing character protections to enable good density to happen quickly. We're facing both a climate crisis and a crisis of affordable housing, both rental and owner-occupied. Good density from the spatial plan, I believe, can address both of these concerns well. I'm really privileged to live in South Wellington. I live almost in the 15-minute city, the area where you can almost get to most of the places you need to go in a 15-minute bike ride. We're not all the way there yet, but basically I want to share my neighbourhood with a lot more people. I want more density where I live because it's a great place to live, and because having more of us living closer to the centre of town locks in good carbon policy early and means that we can really quickly and more easily make the changes towards low carbon transport. Wellington City Council has outlined an ambitious plan under Te Atakura, the First to Zero plan, but we're not on track to achieve the necessary reductions in carbon emissions from transport. If more of us can get where we need to go with shorter journeys and with low carbon active or public transport journeys, then we can use the housing plan to put in place the settings that get us where we need to go in terms of carbon policy. I want to offer a couple of snapshots from life. Firstly, my daughter's school has, in Berhampore, we've experienced a huge amount of churn. Anne's friends have moved away to more affordable rentals in more distant parts of Wellington, Strathmore, out to the Hut, whether for renting, for first home buying. That's really disruptive for kids. Not so much for the ones who stay, but for the ones who are moving. And that's something that's happening because there's a lack of affordable houses to buy and houses to rent near we live. Committing to the spatial plan without watering it down can help to change that. Next snapshot from life is over lockdown. Anne and I spent a lot of time walking around the city, and what we noticed as we looked at kind of the architecture of our city was the way a lot of our streets are made up of places from different eras. We noticed weatherboards from one area, roof lines that suggested building at a different time. The city's always in flux. Movement is part of what makes Wellington great. The changes that the spatial plan proposes won't all come in at once. They'll set the settings, but those changes are part of what Wellington is. It's not fixed and it's not locked in time. My third snapshot from life is from experiences flatting before being fortunate to buy the house we live in. In my last flat, there was a block of townhouses built up on the back wall of the flat. It was noisy, and we lost some sun, and it was a bit inconvenient. But I can recognise that that's a really, really, really small problem compared to people not being able to afford a house, and it's a really, really, really small problem compared to climate change. There are trade-offs involved in keeping the plan without watering it down, but those are really small compared to the crises we're facing. Thank you.
Kia ora. We've got a question from Councillor Rush.
Thank you very much. I've written down a lot of questions, but I also have a 6-year-old. But I'm less concerned, I suppose, as you are. Can you perhaps tell me what's your biggest concern about climate change?
That a lot of people will die from an increase in natural a lot of people dying from an increase in natural disasters, lack of affordable food, increasing severity of storms, droughts, fires, bushfires.
Is this in Wellington? Councillor Rush, we are asking questions about the spatial plan. It was brought up as part of it, but we don't need to dig into
a lot of submitters have talked about climate change without really explaining the exact details.
You've had a quick answer, and we are going to stop now. So, kia ora, thank you very much, Emma, for taking the time to come and kōrero with us. We appreciate you doing so. Now I'd like to go onto Zoom and welcome Diana Munster. Welcome, Diana. So you have 5 minutes, and there may be some questions if you have a little bit of time left over within that 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity for me to link into the meeting via Zoom. I made my submission to the spatial plan was primarily in support, but I do have some concerns, and part of it is the devil is in the detail. I am concerned we've got a housing crisis at the moment, and I know government has removed the need for off-street parking provisions and also put some basically incentivised having multi-storey apartments. So I'm in the sort of Paparangi, Newlands, Johnsonville area, and I'm familiar with that community, but some of my issues or concerns are more general than that. So particularly with, and I think one of the other speakers has touched on this, if we've got apartments side by side without any off-street parking, one of the things is people, unless something catastrophic happens overnight, people will continue to have cars, and hopefully they will leave them behind when they go to work. But then where are they going to put them during the daytime? And normally they're deposited on roads and streets, and that has the impact of making the road reserve space, restricting it for, cycling, for general traffic movement, PT, public transport that is, and the likes of footpaths and shared spaces, particularly with some of our existing roads and streets, which are quite narrow. So just would like to see some thought around, well, how are we going to, so certainly in the short term, I envisage that could be an issue. How is that going to be resolved? And within these apartments, during COVID, it seemed like when people were when we were in lockdown level 4, people in those dense, that live densely in apartments, it was pretty difficult for them to avoid meeting other people if they went outside their apartment. And so these are two things, how can we enable those people to have some freedom during the likes of future COVIDs, but also some space for children to play and recreate within those developments. And also I would like to see more public spaces, and that's parking area, not parking, playing spaces, tracks so people can enjoy nature. And that's one thing I noticed, especially during COVID, more people out walking along the streets, particularly when, with fewer vehicles, but people were walking along the tracks, the likes of the skyline and other adjoining tracks around Seaton Nossiter Park and so forth. So if we're going to have more people sort of living or planning for more people living, I'd like to see more recreational facilities in the form of both walkways, cycleways, the multi-use paths and the likes, as well as recreation for children. Also, and I know it's a difficult balance, some of the history, I'd like to see some form of history retained and some form of character as far as possible. There's some lovely murals alongside or outside the Countdown area in Johnsonville, which relate to some of the history. Those sorts of things are lovely, or in my view, and they also provide a sense of history for the local residents. So I'd love to see that happen. So I guess my chief concern is the lack of capacity of our infrastructure, both existing for such growth. So in terms of, we have subdivisions that are accessible, that are growing, but to get to the some of the ones in Newlands overlooking the Naranga Gorge, but the vehicle access there is very narrow and windy. So how can we make it easier, both vehicle access, that's important for public transport, and walking and cycling and so forth. So that's what I'd like to see.
Kia ora, Diana. So 5
So
minutes
thank you.
is up now. But
No, that's fine.
Thank you very much for taking the time to come and share with us today. We appreciate doing that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. No, my Alan Blake from Wellington Living Streets. Kia ora, Alan. Good to see you today. So you've got 10 minutes, and there will likely be some questions. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, and thanks for giving me the pre-lunch spot. Yay! And if you want to stand up and do this standing up, please feel free. Because it's, I know I think I'm probably about the 352nd person you've had to speak as well. So
you might be right.
Move, it's okay. I think moving is good. So Living Streets just wants to come and talk about pedestrians and walking, and we were thrilled to see that the spatial plan has a real focus on walkability. So that was really good. And then we looked at some of the detail and thought we can do way better than this. So this is a start, but we need to really cement in some of this walkability thing. I see that we use the public transport walking catchment as a kind of proxy for some things, but we've had that in place for some time. So regional councils use the 400 metre and the 800 metre walking catchment as a way of determining who can access their services, but it doesn't really actually say anything about walkability, which is a much more particular beast, if you like, and so I think we can do way better in that. And so I've in our submission we've said about having connected walking, convenient walking, coherent walking. You need destinations to go to, and it needs to be accessible for everybody. So and you can, it's a 3 Cs or whatever. You can have lots of different measures of this, but it's really talking about particularly in the green fields developments, that people can walk from one place to another, that you don't have dead-end roads, that there's no way in or out of, you don't have some of these really long streets like that we have in out the back of Newlands, where you start walking down one and you have to go a long way before you can turn off and go somewhere else. So sometimes people talk about grids as easy ways to get around, so that would be one way of connecting. So our no exit streets should all have a little walkway at the end of them to move from one place to another easily for people walking. It encourages walking. It needs to be convenient. So and this is really important for a land use blueprint, is that we're not just talking about densifying housing, we're talking about increasing services to those places. So they need schools, they need shops, good food shops. They need access to doctors and dentists. They need access to parks. So it's a complete package. So that then it becomes convenient to live in those places. You don't need to travel for miles to go and do your basic daily activities. It needs to be coherent, so it's easy to figure out how to get from one place to the other on foot. Things like lighting help, having well constructed footpaths help, not shared paths at all, and having those destinations to go to. So they're really important. People, if you live like that new subdivision that's going to happen out the back of Porirua, there's nothing there and there's no plans for anything. So all of those people will have to leave that place in a car to drive to anywhere at all. So it's really important to have all of that. And obviously accessibility for all as well. So in the spatial plan currently, there's the only requirement is to have 6 or 10-storey buildings. There's no requirements for any other quality measures to support walkability. And so if you're going to specify the number of stories, you also need to specify how much green space there is. You need to make some provision for connected walking and convenient walking, and there's lots of measures that I'm sure your staff can tell you about for those. And one of the things that in the district plan currently, and it needs to be in the spatial plan, is that when you're walking along, you don't want to be confronted with a wall of driveways and garages, which is what's happening in some of our suburbs now. So you're walking and all you see is garages and driveways. So it's called having an active street front, so that when you're walking along you can see people, there's activity at the street level. And so that's a really important thing that I think should go into the spatial plan, and there's different ways of wording how you do that. So that's the general big picture. And then we've also identified some areas that we think deserve special character mentions, and so they need to go into the spatial plan as special areas, and one of them is Cuba Mall. It's our only pedestrian mall in Wellington. It's the only place where pedestrians are number one, and I would have to say it has the lowest crash rate in all of Wellington. You know, it's funny, but it's also that's what is so great about it, isn't it? The Wellington Waterfront's another place. So it's the second most popular walking route. So let's have some special character on that space as well. The Basin Reserve to Waitangi Park, I see, is sort of got a green line along it, but let's make that a special character area as well. It's one of the biggest open spaces left in Wellington that should be developed into green space, better green space. Wellington Railway Station, so it should be an anchor point and a special character area. You've got your 15,000 odd people marching in and out of there every day, and a lot of other people wandering around. It should be, and it could be one of those places that people go when things get tough. And we definitely need to have best practice design included in the spatial plan to make sure that accessibility and walkability is bedded in for everybody. And that's pretty much my quick leap through those, but I'm happy to help write some of that stuff if people would like. We're more than happy to do that. And please, move. You all look like you're sunk into.
Need some fresh air. Kia ora, Alan. We do have a partai from Councillor Pennant.
Thank you very much for your continued advocacy. Can you just talk to me about the walkability, because there has been some question around, how fast people can walk from a city centre, depending on, your ability or the topography, and because it does obviously make a difference in terms of where the dense buildings go.
Yeah. So the public transport measures of 400 metres and 800 metres is just a line on a bit of a map. And as we Wellington people know, when we're walking up the hill in Roseneath or in Kandala, going up is a different story from going down. So you really want the bus to be able to go up to the top and you can walk down or something. So even for the 1.2 metres a second that is supposed to be the standard walking speed, that's quite different from topography, but also from age-related people little kids, if you've ever walked with a 2-year-old, you know they don't go the same speed as adults, and neither does your 80-year-old granny. It's just a thing that happens. People slow down. Even I've noticed people walking faster than me these days. It's like horror. It's awful. So there is a need for thinking about what 5 minutes means. So it means different things for different people. And obviously in Wellington, we have some roads that take 2 minutes to cross because you have to wait at the traffic light for that long.
I've got a question for you. So the psychology behind walking, what do we know about it? Because when I was a young person living in Johnsonville, everyone did walk, a lot further from what it seems today. What have the observations been about what's an acceptable walkable distance? Because some people will say 10 minutes is just too much of a hassle. What do you observe and know about that?
Gosh, that's a whole PhD. But it's a really good question. It's because one of the things we find with walking is that it's a habit. So if people have never walked that way or walked that route or know how to get there, and particularly they find it's just a hurdle and it's too far and too much. Whereas once during COVID, everybody went out and walked, and they found all sorts of places around their neighbourhood they hadn't seen before, and they probably are walking more. So, but making it easy to walk, so you don't have to wait 2 minutes to cross the road, would be a really big step in the right direction for encouraging people to do that. I don't think there's an answer on exactly why there's a big dip in walking.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your constructive options there. We do have a question from Councillor or Deputy Mayor Free.
I was really interested in your discussion about active street frontages. Do you have much information about SEPTED in relation to safety walking in streets and how we can actually maybe specify some of that into the district plan?
I see the SEPTED was the only thing that was mentioned as far as, and that's more got a safety focus. So SEPTED does talk about having active street frontages, but it's from a safety point of view. So some of it is not just about safety, it's about having nice places to live, having that quality places to live. So, but I'm sure we could all, I'm very confident we can squeeze it all in to make get those active street frontages. If you go for a walk at lunchtime, have a look at where the driveways are and how you feel when you walk across them. Have a look at those garages. It's a really important part for quality.
Well, kia ora, Alan. Thank you so much for coming and share your whakaaro with us. We appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we do need to move. We've only got another 10 minutes. I'd like to welcome Gracie Ridley-Smith from Keep Wellington's Character. Kia ora, Gracie.
Hey, kia ora. So let me just get myself organised. All right. Kia ora, councillors. Thank you for having me today. This is my first time submitting, so please bear with me. I'm submitting on behalf of Keep Wellington's Character, which is a non-partisan, non-political advocacy group, heritage advocacy campaign. I'd like to thank all councillors for hearing so many submitters and for squeezing me in as the lucky last. My understanding from people who have been here throughout this process is that about 2/3 of those giving oral submissions have been opposed to the DSP with detailed reasoning. It's been interesting by contrast that people in opposition have been largely generic in nature, reporting health problems, unacceptable health problems and access problems to poor housing availability. The first point I'd like to make relates to the consultation process. The second point relates to Keep Wellington's Character's position on the draft spatial plan, and the last point is looking ahead to the future. The DSP proposes huge changes for Wellington, the biggest set of changes to planning this city has seen in decades. It will affect tens of thousands of people's lives and have long-standing ramifications for residents, new and old. It's therefore surprising and disappointing how the consultation period played out. This process became smoother and better organised as time went on, but when it first opened, we were being given maps by councillors as single bits of paper and printouts, crucial information relating to the DSP that was not available to the public. We then spent private money physically photocopying maps and distributing them to people. The information was slow to be released, there were errors and there were updates. These things needed to be totally resolved before going to the public. The consultation period was mostly online. The maps were small with fine print and they were quite technical. You had to click to create layers. We know this does not suit all people, especially older people and people who are sight impaired or have other disabilities, and this is not fair and equitable. Oh, my phone's just stopped working. It'll just reload itself. Sorry. Yeah, not fair or equitable. I have a pamphlet here that was produced by the Wellington City Council which tells me what events are happening over the summer. And I would ask, why wasn't something similar produced and distributed relating to the DSP? Many of the consultation events had to be cancelled and their attendance numbers limited due to COVID restrictions. And I ask, why wasn't the consultation period extended, and why weren't these events postponed rather than simply cancelled? Keep Wellington's character was established out of a need to help people access and understand information relating to the DSP. We spent huge amounts of time doing the council's job. I work full time and I'm exhausted. We spoke time and time again, we spoke to people about the DSP and they had no idea what was going on. Time and time again, we spoke to older people who said they cared about it, but they couldn't engage with it. They found it difficult. They didn't understand. We spoke to the media. We set up crucial pieces of media coverage which ignited really important debate. And this isn't so much about which side of the debate you fall on, but it's just really, really important that debate happens in the public and that there's that access to information. Secondly, I'd like to make clear that Keep Wellington's character is opposed to this DSP, but not to any and all future draft spatial plans. We are not advocating for status quo, as that has clearly failed too many people. Planning rules have been overly restrictive and the planning process slow and prohibitively expensive. We do not support heritage regulations that mean people cannot install double glazing in a heritage home or carry out other alterations which improve heritage homes and upgrade them to 21st century needs. What we oppose is the extent of this draft spatial plan. We seem to have gone from one extreme to the other. We support council making changes to allow for appropriate housing and development, but we do not support the lifting of the demolition rule. This is not to say that some heritage homes should not be demolished. Some are beyond repair and have little to no architectural merit. The demo rule is just about creating a process to evaluate the existing structure versus the planned replacement and weigh the two options up against each other. What we're really worried about is that people will be able to go in and just demo quickly, immediately, because it's been lifted, and then we may end up with, parking lots, as we saw happen in Christchurch after the post-quake rebuild, when many valuable historic buildings were demoed, and to this day you can visit the sites and they're not a usable site. They're not a healthy home. They don't house students. They don't house lower socioeconomic people, which are the people that have been championed as being the main winners of this draft spatial plan. So, and Mayor Andy Foster, I don't know where he is. Anyway, when he supported the introduction of the demo rule, one of the things you can go online and see when the council released the press release was saying this is not about saying no to all development. This is just about being able to weigh up, okay, is this a derelict, mouldy, damp home, and is it going to then create 6 new townhouses? Brilliant. Okay, rip it down. But if that's not what's going to happen, if actually a luxury, multi-million dollar home is going to go up, then I would seriously question that. There's widespread agreement about the phasing of intensification as envisioned by the NPSUD in the short, medium term and long-term intensification. A staged approach is crucial, and we wholeheartedly support that. There is no mass rapid transport plans or decisions for Newtown and Berhampore yet. Intensification in those areas should await those decisions, which are now post-COVID really up in the air. I think we can all agree on that. In the meantime, Newtown residents have produced an alternative plan to house more than 2,000, to create more than 2,000 homes concentrated along the main road near to transport. This is your short to medium term solution for Newtown, and brings me to my final point about looking ahead to the future. The NPSUD has certain capacity requirements, but also recognises where there are qualifying matters, such as character, heritage, and other Section 6 matters of national importance. This is the basis for exemption. We thank Prime Minister and the Honourable Grant Robertson for that provision, as they were both Ministers of Culture and Heritage, and that's their legacy. They understood the importance of heritage and character to Wellingtonians. There's good evidence about qualifying matters relating to inner suburbs, and this needs to be explored further with groups from Thorndon and Mount Vic in particular. Please work with residents rather than against them. As demonstrated by the new town plan, there is genuine and real interest in working with the council to house more people and achieve density done well. We welcome and support a co-designing collaborative approach. It's unacceptable that folk are consigned to cold, damp, mouldy houses. Get on with enforcement action and creative solutions to eradicate substandard homes from Wellington. Set up an information and enforcement bureau inside the council to help students and those without a voice, and use the city's under-resourced land, which is available now for affordable housing provision through prefabricated homes and other quick solutions which can provide meaningful solutions. Please don't lose sight of our precious character. We're not, my final, most important point is we're not opposed to upzoning or making it easier to build homes, but we just want to do it in the right way. Thank you. If you have any questions, you've got 1 minute, 49 seconds.
And counting down, are there any part-time councillors? Councillor Pennant.
Thank you for all the work that you've done. So would you support basically planning rather than a deregulated approach, particularly to sensitive heritage areas? So saying that, you know, this is where it should be built. And how would you respond to the argument that then that puts the price up of that land and then makes that more expensive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's undoubtedly a super complicated issue. I mean, you've touched on one point, which is this idea around the price of land anyway. And I think one of the key things one thing that's really important is that I think in the debate, we've lost sight of this idea that there are 5 character suburbs or heritage suburbs in Wellington. We've heard other people submitting about Māori homes in Kandala or Kilburnie. These are not the heritage suburbs, and we have this is not what we're advocating on behalf of. So, you know, we're really just talking about Mount Vic, Thorndon, Mount Cook, and these inner city suburbs. And I think one of the things that's really important to bear in mind is that the price of land already there is so expensive that we had one of the town planners acknowledged via the media that it was actually unlikely that house prices would go down. It would probably only affect the rental part of the market anyway. So I'm not sure I've answered your question very well. But yes, we would support a more planned approach rather than sort of open slather deregulation.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Thank you. Do you think Brooklyn is a character area?
No, Brooklyn is not a character area. No, it's Mount Cook, Mount Victoria, Thorndon, Berhampore, Newtown. Oh, the Ara and the Terrace. It depends on, sometimes people they're put together into, Ara and the Terrace, yeah.
Well, kia ora, tēnā koe Gracie. Thank you very much for coming in today. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, councillors, we've just got to do the last bit, which is to accept the oral submitters' submissions. So I move that we receive the information that we thank the oral submitters for speaking to their submissions. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Foon. So now we can, is there any debate on that? Pretty sure we're going to accept them, so there won't be any debate. So we can now vote. And that is unanimous. Kia ora, thank you very much. So kua mutu e tēnei hui, e tu e te karakia. Unu hia, ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te ara takatū. Koe ara e rongo, whakaeria ake ki runga. Kia wātia, ai rā kua wātia. So is this a lunch?